In the quiet halls of Queensbury International High, a prestigious all-girls academy, whispers lingered like shadows. As Sara stepped through the doors that morning, a hush fell over her classmates, their expressions a mix of disdain and pity. Confused and uneasy, Sara could feel the weight of something unspoken hovering around her. It was a strange day. She was used to admiration, not such judgment. Sara had always been the pride of her school. At 17, she was known not only for her striking beauty, but also for her unmatched intelligence and drive. Her classmates envied her for her effortless grace and for her steadfast dedication to her studies. Sara would wake early every day, put on her crisp school uniform, and walk to Queensbury with her long, dark hair neatly styled in two top knots. Her face glowed with a natural beauty that needed no enhancement. As she walked through the corridors, heads turned, and she could hear the faint whispers. "There goes Sara, always perfect, always the best." But Sara ignored them. Her mind was fixed solely on her studies, and she took her position as the top student seriously. Every day, she sat in the front row, her hand the first to rise with an answer, her eyes focused on the lessons as she absorbed every word the teachers said. However, as time passed, Sara's beauty seemed to become a distraction for more than just her peers. Even her teachers seemed drawn to her presence. Mr. Reed, her math teacher, often stumbled over his explanations when she was near. Mr. Okoro, the literature teacher, couldn't help but comment on her precise, graceful handwriting or her insightful essays. Despite the added attention, Sara remained oblivious, her mind locked on her goals. One evening, as the sun cast long shadows across the empty classroom, Sara was deep into her studies when she heard a voice. "Sara, you're still here?" It was Mira, one of her classmates. Mira leaned against the door, watching Sara with an amused smile. "Hi, Mira," Sara greeted her with a smile. "Just finishing up some extra reading." Mira sauntered over, glancing over the books spread out on Sara's desk. Shaking her head, she chuckled. "If I were as beautiful as you, Sara, I wouldn't bother studying this hard. You could easily get favors from the teachers who clearly adore you." Sara's eyebrows shot up in confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked. Myra's grin grew mischievous. "Come on, Sara. Haven't you noticed how Mr. Reed and Mr. Okoro look at you? You could probably get top grades without all this extra work." Sara stared, her mind spinning. She had never considered using her looks for an advantage. Not once. "That wouldn't be right," she protested softly, shaking her head. Mira shrugged nonchalantly. "It's just a thought." She turned toward the door. "Anyway, don't stay too late." "Okay." Sara sat alone in the fading light, Myra's words ringing in her ears. Could her life really be easier if she leaned on her beauty? Even just a little? She'd always believed in hard work. But what if there was another way? That night, as she walked home under the streetlights, Sara couldn't shake off Myra's words. She began to look at herself differently, wondering if she'd underestimated her own power. When she reached home, her parents greeted her warmly as they always did. But that night, Sara felt distracted. She was quieter than usual at dinner, her mind caught in a swirl of questions and curiosity. In her bedroom, she stood in front of her mirror, studying her reflection with new eyes. Her clear skin, bright eyes, and gentle features stared back at her. She had always ignored her beauty, considering it irrelevant to her goals. But had she been blind to the power it held? For the first time, she reached for her makeup kit, a gift from her cousin that she had barely touched. She lightly applied a layer of foundation, a hint of blush, and some lip gloss. She let her hair down, allowing it to cascade around her shoulders in soft waves. She hardly recognized herself in the mirror. The next morning, as she entered the school compound, Sara felt an immediate shift. More heads turned, and the whispers grew louder. Even some of her teachers did a double take when she passed by. She felt a strange sense of exhilaration, and her heart beat faster as she entered Mr. Reed's math class. When he handed out a surprise quiz, a sudden worry gripped her. She hadn't prepared for it. But then Myra's words echoed in her mind. She decided to test this power Mira had suggested. When Mr. Reed came to collect her paper, Sara looked up, smiled sweetly, and said softly, "I hope I did well on the quiz, Mr. Reed. I really want to keep my grades high in your class." Mr. Reed's face flushed slightly, and he stammered, "I'm sure you did just fine, Sara. You're my best student after all." The next day, Mr. Reed returned the quizzes, and Sara was shocked to see a perfect score. She knew she hadn't answered every question correctly. Could Mira have been right? With newfound confidence, Sara began using her looks with other teachers as well. A smile here, a kind word there, and suddenly she found herself receiving high grades without studying as rigorously as she once had. For a while, it felt liberating. She could finally relax, get a full night's sleep, and not worry about endless hours of study. Her grades remained high, and she felt unstoppable. But as the days passed, Sara didn't notice the shift in the atmosphere around her. Her classmates, who once admired her dedication, began to whisper behind her back. They saw how she effortlessly breezed through exams, while they struggled and studied late into the night. They began to resent her. Mira, who had initially encouraged Sara, watched her success with mixed emotions, a blend of satisfaction and envy. She hadn't expected Sara to excel so quickly with her newfound strategy, and a bitter jealousy began to grow within her. One afternoon, as Sara was leaving school, she overheard two teachers talking in an empty classroom. She paused outside, her curiosity piqued. "Have you noticed Sara's recent behavior?" Mr. Okoro's voice was low but clear. "Yes," replied Mr. Reed. "She's certainly changed. She seems to be using her charms more. It's becoming a problem. The other students are complaining," Mr. Okoro added. "They think we're showing favoritism." Mr. Reed let out a low chuckle. "Well, she's a beautiful young woman, but you're right. Maybe we should arrange to discuss her behavior. Off school grounds, perhaps this weekend?" Sara's heart raced as she hurried away. Sara's heart pounded as she fled down the empty hallway, Mr. Okoro and Mr. Reed's voices echoing in her mind. She was filled with a deep sense of regret and fear. What had she gotten herself into? This wasn't what she intended when she started this experiment. She felt trapped, as if she'd opened a door that was impossible to close. That night, Sara couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, haunted by their words. The attention she had once found flattering now felt heavy with expectation. Every smile from her teachers, every compliment, they all seemed to be asking for something in return, something she wasn't willing to give. The next morning, Sara made up her mind. She would go back to her old ways, relying on her hard work and intelligence rather than her appearance. She tied her hair back in her usual neat style, washed off any trace of makeup, and returned to her uniform's original modest look. She felt like herself again, grounded in her principles. As she walked into school, she prepared herself for whatever backlash might come. But as soon as she stepped into the school grounds, she sensed something was wrong. Clusters of students gathered in small groups, whispering and glancing in her direction. Her heart tightened, but she forced herself to keep her head high, walking confidently toward her classroom. As she entered, the room went silent. Her classmates turned to stare, their expressions filled with a strange mix of pity, disgust, and curiosity. A sinking feeling settled in Sara's stomach. It was Mira who broke the silence, standing up with a sly smile. "Well, well," she said loudly, her voice dripping with mockery. "If it isn't our precious teacher's pet, or should I say, little charmer?" Sara felt as if she'd been slapped. "What are you talking about, Mira?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mira crossed her arms, smirking. Oh, come on, Sara. Everyone knows what you've been doing to get those grades. Playing favorites with the teachers, using your charms to stay at the top. She let out a sharp laugh. Guess the perfect Sara isn't so perfect after all. Sara's world seemed to spin. That's not true, she cried. I never. But her protest was drowned out by a murmur of agreement from the other students. She could see the judgment in their eyes, the rumors taking root in their minds, unwilling to hear her side. Just then, Mrs. Hastings, the school principal, appeared in the doorway, her face tight with disapproval. Her voice was cold as she said, Sara, come with me to my office immediately. Sara followed in stunned silence, each step echoing down the hallway as they made their way to the principal's office. Every glance from the other students, every whisper, seemed to deepen the shame twisting in her stomach. In the office, Mrs. Hastings' face was hard as she closed the door behind them. Sara, she began, her voice sharp, I've received some very disturbing complaints regarding your behavior with the male teachers at this school. These rumors have spread quickly, and parents are now calling outraged. They're even threatening to withdraw their daughters if you remain at Queensbury. Tears pricked Sara's eyes. But it's not true, she pleaded, her voice breaking. I did smile a bit more, but that's all. I've never done anything inappropriate. Mrs. Hastings' expression softened for a moment, but she remained stern. Sara, whether it's true or not, the damage has been done. You've created an environment where even the appearance of impropriety has caused harm. Sara felt as though the floor had dropped out from under her. What does that mean? It means, Mrs. Hastings said with a sigh, that we have no choice but to expel you from Queensbury. Your presence here has become too controversial. The words hit Sara like a physical blow. Her perfect record, her dreams of graduating at the top of her class, all shattered in an instant. As she left the principal's office, her world in ruins, she saw Mira leaning against a wall down the hallway, watching her with a triumphant, twisted smile. For the first time, Sara understood the depth of Myra's betrayal. She had trusted her, confided in her, and Mira had used that trust against her. The next few days were a blur of arguments and disappointment. Her parents were shocked and heartbroken. They didn't believe the rumors, but they were angry and disappointed that Sara had even tried to use her appearance to get ahead. We raised you better than this, her father said, his voice heavy with sorrow. Her mother, though hurt, was more practical. We need to find you a new school, she said firmly. You're not giving up on your education over this. After days of searching, her parents managed to get her enrolled in Oakwood High, a public school worlds apart from the elite atmosphere of Queensbury. The adjustment was rough. As Sara stood in front of Oakwood's gates on her first day, she felt like a different person. She was no longer the confident, top-of-the-class student she had been at Queensbury. She felt broken and unsure of herself, haunted by whispers and rumors that still lingered in her mind. Taking a deep breath, Sara stepped into the school compound, determined to start over. This was her second chance, an opportunity to prove that she was more than just a pretty face, that she could rise on her own merits. But as she soon discovered, Oakwood High came with its own set of challenges that would test her resilience and self-worth in ways she hadn't anticipated. In her first week, Sara tried to keep her head down, attending classes and avoiding the gaze of her new classmates. But in the crowded halls of Oakwood, rumors seemed to follow her, whispers of her sudden transfer and mysterious past. Even here, her beauty caught attention, and it wasn't long before a few of the students recognized her from the stories circulating online. One afternoon, during lunch, Sara found herself cornered by a group of students near the cafeteria. A girl with fiery red hair, Amber, leaned against a locker, eyeing Sara with an amused smirk. So, Queensbury star student, huh? Amber said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. What brings you to Oakwood? Got tired of your old school? Sara clenched her fists, trying to keep her composure. I'm just here to focus on my studies, she replied quietly. Amber let out a mocking laugh. Sure, that's what they all say. But rumor has it you didn't leave Queensbury willingly. Around her, the other students chuckled, some exchanging knowing glances. Sara's face burned with shame and frustration, but she bit her tongue, unwilling to give them more to gossip about. Just then, a voice cut through the tension. Leave her alone, Amber. Sara turned to see a tall, quiet boy with dark, thoughtful eyes standing nearby. He stepped forward, placing himself between Sara and the group. Haven't you heard enough rumors for one day? Amber rolled her eyes, scoffing as she waved her friends to follow her. Whatever, Nate. Just trying to get to know the new girl. As the crowd dispersed, Nate looked back at Sara, offering a small, reassuring smile. Don't mind them, he said. Oakwood has its share of characters. Sara managed a small smile in return, relieved to have a moment of kindness amid the chaos. Thanks, she murmured, feeling a spark of hope. But Sara knew she couldn't rely on the kindness of others alone. If she was going to rebuild her life and prove to herself that she could succeed on her own terms, she would have to face her past and find a way forward. Over the following weeks, Sara tried to find her footing at Oakwood High. She worked hard to keep up with her studies, immersing herself in assignments and projects. Despite the lingering whispers and occasional side glances, she kept her head down, determined to make her second chance count. Gradually, Nate became a steady presence in her life. He didn't pry into her past or press her for details, but he seemed to understand her desire to start fresh. Together, they'd spend afternoons in the library, where he'd help her with math problems or simply keep her company as she studied. His quiet encouragement reminded her of who she once was, a hard-working, dedicated student who believed in her own potential. One day, as they worked side by side, Nate finally spoke up. You know, people talk, but that doesn't define you, Sara. You're proving yourself every day by being here and giving it your best. His words struck a chord. For the first time, Sara felt a renewed sense of pride, realizing she didn't need validation from anyone else. She could trust herself and her abilities. However, her past hadn't fully let go of her. One afternoon, as she walked home, she noticed Mira standing outside her house. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't seen Mira since leaving Queensbury, and a wave of anger and hurt washed over her. What are you doing here, Mira? Sara demanded, folding her arms. Mira flashed a nervous smile, a far cry from the triumphant smirk she'd worn the last time they'd met. I wanted to apologize, Mira stammered. I didn't mean for things to go as far as they did. You thought what? Sara interrupted, her voice edged with anger. That ruining my reputation and getting me expelled was just a game? Mira shifted uncomfortably, guilt flashing across her face. I was jealous, okay? Everyone adored you, the teachers, the students. I felt like I couldn't measure up. I thought if I brought you down a little, I'd finally feel equal. Sara shook her head, her voice quiet but firm. You have no idea what that did to me. I lost my friends, my school, everything, but I'm done letting you control my life. I'm moving on. With that, Sara turned and walked away, leaving Mira standing there. She felt a weight lift from her chest. Finally, she had faced her past and let it go. At Oakwood, Sara continued to work hard, refusing to let her past define her. Her grades improved, her confidence returned, and she forged new friendships with students who valued her for who she was. Nate, loyal and understanding, stayed by her side, and their friendship blossomed into something deeper, a bond built on trust and shared dreams. As graduation approached, Sara stood among her classmates, looking back on the journey she'd taken. She had fallen, been betrayed, and faced harsh judgments. But through it all, she had discovered her strength, learned to value herself, and build a future on her own terms. When her name was called at the ceremony, she walked across the stage with her head held high, filled with a sense of pride she hadn't felt before. She had survived, thrived, and emerged stronger, proving to herself and everyone around her that she was so much more than just a pretty face. As she met Nate's eyes in the crowd, she smiled, knowing her future was now hers to shape, her past only a part of the story that had made her who she was.